Dr. Evan Davis is a 2006 RUSD alumnus. After studying plasma physics and fusion in graduate school, he now performs research and development in the semiconductor industry. So please give Dr. Davis a warm welcome.
Thank you. I am an RUSD alum, and I currently work as a physicist for the company ASML, located in San Diego. So I think this whole series, this whole seminar series is supposed to open your eyes as to, career paths you can pursue in STEM. I definitely, when I was in high school, did not know what I wanted to do, and even a few years into college, still didn't really know what I wanted to do. So it took me a little while to land on physics. I'm really glad I did, but your path can be fluid, it can move around, and that's okay. And yeah, I took high school physics as well, and when I started and graduated from high school, this is kind of what my picture of physics looked like. And maybe some of this looks familiar to you guys taking physics. You have some inclined planes that blocks are sliding down. You have some pendula that are swinging back and forth. You have some pictures of atoms. But that's kind of what my idea of what physics looked like. Just kind of fun little puzzles you could solve on a piece of paper. But it didn't really see, I didn't really see how to connect that to a career, how I could actually get employment out of it, make a living from it, as much as I enjoyed doing it. And so that was one of the reasons I didn't actually start as a physics major in high school or in college. But fortunately, it's a little, physics is not totally solved. There's a lot more that we're doing even today. And this is a picture of one of the machines that I perform research on at ASML. And we'll dive into what this machine does in a few slides. But it's a lot more interesting, a lot more dynamic than just these pictures or simple problems you're going to solve in high school physics. So for the agenda, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about me, a little bit about my path to how I got to working as a physicist at ASML. Then we'll spend some time talking about ASML itself, and then we'll talk a little bit about even some very simple physics you'll learn even in high school that actually are foundational to some of the things we're doing at ASML. And then tell you a little bit about a day in the life, what is it like to actually work at a company like this, and then we'll end with question and answer, and hopefully you guys will have lots of questions and I can answer them. As I mentioned, I'm a RUSD alum. I graduated in 2006 from Arlington. And I don't think the STEM Academy was definitely not a thing at that point in time. Arlington, while I was there, had a biotechnology program that I was part of. But obviously I ventured into physics. I also did this environmental kind of academic decathlon type thing called Envirothon. I'm not sure if that's still done within RUSD, but that was another thing I did. After Arlington, where I majored in physics and applied math, and like I mentioned, I didn't actually know right when I started out that I wanted to do physics. I actually bounced around a little bit between a few engineering majors, and finally I had I guess kind of felt a calling towards physics, and we're
going to go ahead and have you jump on that.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, is this better? Yeah. Sorry about that. Okay, so I did not initially start as a physics or a math major at UCR. I was in the engineering program. But I did eventually kind of feel a calling towards physics, and I kind of never looked back. Also, while at UCR, I did work at a few labs, the most prominent of which was an internship at the College of Engineering's Center for Environmental Research and Technology. So that was a really eye-opening experience. They basically took me in as a freshman and allowed me to start doing research, simulating hybrid electric vehicles on some kind of advanced computational platforms. That was fun, but I kind of wanted to get my hands a little dirtier than just running simulations on computers. So I started working on a few more labs, and I eventually ended up doing the Princeton Plasma Physics Lab between my junior year and senior year of college. and that's where I had my first introduction to plasma physics and fusion. And that was something I ended up pursuing then in graduate school. That program was the Department of Energy through a program called the Science Undergraduate Laboratory Internship Program, or SULI. And you guys are still in high school, but when you do get to college, there are lots of opportunities like this to go do research at labs all around the country through the Department of Energy, as well as other programs that the government sponsors. Funnily enough, that was actually the first time I'd ever flown. So yeah, I flew from right out of Ontario Airport over to Philadelphia, first flight. So it's also, science is a really great way to expand your horizons and travel. So I did a lot of traveling in graduate school as well. And then also, while I was at UCR, I did some tutoring at the Learning Center, which is now called the Academic Resource Center. So that was really fun. It enabled me to meet a lot of people. It allowed me to stay fresh on my fundamentals, which is still important to this day. I think some of you guys take classes at UCR, is that right? No? Okay. Well, if any of you end up going to UCR, the Academic Resource Center is a great place if you need help with any of your classes. Definitely a place to go take a look at. And I'm sure lots of other universities have similar programs. Okay, after UCR, I spent the next 8 years pursuing my PhD. So that's quite some time. PhDs take a long time. This one may be a little longer than most. But process, you end up, as you start out, you just start taking a few classes. Basically just a more advanced version of what you might do in undergrad, but you pretty quickly move beyond the classroom and start doing research in a laboratory. And you actually have to perform original research and publish that research and then defend it in front of a community of peers to get this PhD. And so it's not like school really at all, especially in the latter years. It's much more like an apprenticeship program. And also not like school because you get paid to do it. Not a lot, but you get paid a little. So if you're worried about, thinking about college and paying for college, I totally understand that. But graduate school in the sciences is almost entirely paid for through various fellowship programs, through the school or outside of the school. So don't let funding be something that you're concerned about if you want to go to graduate school, because there's lots of support to enable you to do this. And while I was in graduate school, I developed and fielded a set of laser diagnostics that were used to study high temperature fusion plasmas with temperatures exceeding 100 million degrees Celsius. And you might have read a lot about fusion in the news recently. There's quite a bit of movement in that field right now. And then most recently, since 2018, I've been working for ASML. This is an international company with many branches, and I work in the San Diego branch doing research and development on high average power UV light sources. And that might not mean a lot, but we're going to hopefully give you a little more information on that in the next slide or two. So yeah, ASML, you guys didn't seem like, nobody raised their hand when I asked if you'd heard of it. And that's okay. So who is ASML? What do we do? How does it fit into the global ecosystem? So here, this is just a visualization of the 50 most valuable companies in the world based on market capitalization. Turns out that there's only a few companies in the world, we call them fabrication facilities or fabs, actually make these computer chips. Lots of companies design computer chips, but they don't actually physically make them. So there's 3 big names that come to mind. Intel, which is just below the 50 company market cap, so they're not on this chart. There's Samsung, which makes some computer chips, and then there's also another company called Taiwanese Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, or TSMC. They make a great deal of computer chips. Maybe 50% or more of the computer chips in the world come out of that company. But these fabs, they make the computer chips, but how do they make them? Well, they use equipment that they purchase from other companies, and these companies, the fabs don't actually design this equipment. Our company, ASML, actually designs one of the most critical pieces of this equipment needed to print computer chips. And so there we are, actually, one of the 50 most valuable companies in the world. So not bad for a company you've never heard of. So I'm going to tell you just a little bit more about the company. And then we're going to show you a video, which I think is pretty cool, that does a way better job explaining what we do than I can. So some additional quick facts. We are an international company. We have over 60 locations that span Europe, the US, and Asia. Our headquarters is actually in the Netherlands, and about half of our employees work there. We have over 39,000 employees from over 143 different countries, and that's it's a great experience to be able to work with people from all over the world and to be able to see all of the different perspectives they can bring and just learn from them. So it's a really great environment. And we also do over 21 billion in annual revenue. So that means basically we sell our machines and to companies like TSMC, Intel, Samsung, etc. And those machines where we sell over $21 billion worth of them a year. So what does ASML actually make? We make equipment that the computer chip fabs use to make their computer chips. The technology is actually called photolithography. This is essentially means, lithography means marking something, and photo means light. And so basically here we're using light to mark the computer chips and print the microscopic patterns that enable you to go on Instagram, look things up on Google, so on and so forth. But it's very much like printing, and also very much like old school film photography, where you have a film that you expose to light and then you develop that film. So in the same manner, we use light to expose the silicon wafer, and then we develop that wafer and are able to print features almost the level of atoms with our latest generation equipment. And our most recent generation of machines use so-called extreme ultraviolet or EUV light to print the most high-end computer chip features. So EUV is very short wavelength light. It's almost X-ray. Not quite X-ray, but quite close. And with that being said, I'm going to try to start this video then. It's about just under 10 minutes, so hopefully you find it as entertaining as I do.
We're suiting up to take you inside a clean room that's building an engineering marvel that'll push the entire electronics industry to the next frontier.
They're both amazing machines and scary machines. There's an enormous amount of complexity with them. There's an enormous number of things that can potentially go wrong. It's something that you don't necessarily sleep well at night just having the machine on your floor.
It's about the size of a school bus, weighing over 180,000 kilograms with over 100,000 parts and 3,000 interlocking cables. Pop the hood, and you'll see lasers shooting tiny droplets of tin, generating plasma that'll get collected and reflected by a series of mirrors to then etch nanoscale patterns onto chips that'll eventually go into your next cell phone. And after 30 years of innovations in physics, chemistry, and material science, it's about ready for its debut. An integrated circuit, or chip, is one of the biggest innovations of the 20th century. It launched a technological revolution, created Silicon Valley, and everyone's got one in their pocket. But if you zoomed in on one of those chips, I mean really zoomed in, you'd find a highly complex, nanoscale-sized city that's expertly designed to send information back and forth.
Semiconductor lithography is the ultimate alchemy, turning sand into gold.
You start with a silicon wafer, you add insulators, you add something called a gate, which you apply a voltage to it, and it turns on or off the flow of electrons. That's the little switch that sort of does the 0 to 1s that you always hear about.
You build up in a sequence of layers the network, the streets and buildings that you need in order to make these transistors and interconnect those transistors. At the end, you can turn that into something that has substantially more value than a bucket of sand.
At big tech conferences, chip manufacturers will announce they've hit impossibly small new milestones, like 22 nanometer, then 14 nanometer, and 10 nanometer designs. That means they found a way to shrink the size and increase the number of features on a chip, which ultimately improves the overall processing power. This is what's been driving the semiconductor industry, a drumbeat called Moore's Law.
Moore's Law is an expectation. It's not a natural law. It's an expectation that we innovate at a pace of roughly doubling the density every 2 years. All of those things allow us to offer better products, allow us to offer cheaper products with the same capability, and that in turn drives the demand for the overall industry.
That means we've got to be able to cram in more and more functionality per square millimeter on a chip. All of the designs, all the streets and everything have to be smaller and smaller in dimensions.
Moore's Law has been predicted to be dying for a long time, and yet it never is, because each generation of engineers knows it's their expectation to keep working on it, to keep going at a certain pace.
The core technique at the heart of this expectation is called photolithography. It's a chip manufacturing process that's similar to darkroom photography, but instead of a negative for a picture, they're using something called a mask or reticle to expose a geometric print.
It's basically a projection system where we have light source, a mask or reticle, which is the blueprint, then the wafer, and we have to manage the light on the way through to get a perfect reproduction of that pattern on a silicon wafer. That enables you to build all of the billions of transistors that you need in order to make a functional chip.
The light sources are lasers, created from a mixture of gases like carbon dioxide or argon fluoride. When excited by an electric current, the gas molecules will emit laser radiation that are then tuned to a specific wavelength that imprints the chip design. There's a drive to get the light source to shorter and shorter wavelengths, because the shorter it gets, the more transistors you can cram onto a chip.
In terms of the electromagnetic spectrum, what we can see visibly is between about 400 and 650 nanometers.
The chip industry's gone from 365 nanometer wavelengths to 248 to something called
argon fluoride immersion. So argon fluoride refers to a wavelength, 193 nanometers. It is produced using a deep ultraviolet laser light source.
The industry tried to go to 157 nanometer light, and that failed after companies had invested hundreds of millions of dollars in it.
The field then had to invent new technical tricks for the systems in use today.
They actually put water in between the bottom lens element and the wafer because the wavelength of light in water is quite a bit shorter. When I first heard about it, I thought it was just crazy. You know, you're going to get water all over the stages and the electronics inside the tool. And there was some very clever engineering that allowed them to contain that water in a little puddle as the wafer is going back and forth at about 700 millimeters a second.
But that turns out to be coming near the end of its ability to produce even finer and finer features.
So to keep Moore's Law on track without breaking the laws of physics, chip manufacturers have been racing to bring this technology online, extreme ultraviolet lithography. It takes the wavelength of light from 193 nanometers down to 13.5.
The jump is much larger than what we would normally do, and that's partly because it's more of a disruptive technology.
The first academic work on EUV was done in 1986 when I was still an undergraduate in college. Through my whole career, we've been hearing that EUV was coming. There were so many fundamental problems with using these soft X-ray wavelengths for a lithography tool.
We're down to the point where the amount of variation can be measured in atoms, and so you have to work very hard to have control of those dimensions.
And that is where ASML comes in.
ASML is the most important tech company you've never heard of. We build the big machines that make small chips. EUV was a massive step for us to undertake. Not only did we need to have an entirely new scanner because we had to work in the vacuum and at wavelengths where you need to have only reflective optics, which required a huge amount of innovation, but we also needed a new light source as well. In fact, it's the first time ever that we've needed to change the light source and huge elements of the scanner design at the same time.
But for this story, we're just going to focus on the lasers. Here's how they work in the machine.
The source of the light is a tiny little droplet of tin.
So they're smaller than the diameter of a human hair, which we fire across the vessel, and then we intercept those with a pulsed laser beam of very high power. And I have to hit it with an accuracy of just a few microns, even though it's traveling at, let me say, at a speed well in excess of the speed limit.
It forms a plasma that emits EUV light. There's a collector mirror that collects that light and sends it into the scanner. And there are 4 mirrors that essentially shape that light into a slit that bounces off the reticle.
You'll see a reticle stage doing this and a wafer stage doing this. And what is happening is step and scan, which is basically means we continue to reproduce that particular pattern over and over again. Just to give you a sense of the mechanical complexity even, the wafer stage itself is something like 200 kilograms in weight, and yet it's able to accelerate faster than a fighter jet.
The thing that probably had people the most skeptical was getting the power on the source up.
When we started out, we didn't generate the power that we wanted, and we struggled at the beginning to understand why.
Every year it was slipping out, and the actual power we were getting was stuck around very low levels, impractical levels.
We continue to dive into looking more fundamentally at the basic plasma physics. What were we missing? It was around about 2015 where we finally unlocked the secret. It's all about exactly controlling how you deliver that energy to the droplet and then how you deliver it to the tin afterwards. It becomes very critical in pushing that conversion efficiency up. You don't just need to hit the tin droplet with one laser pulse, but in fact 2. The first of those pulses shapes the target in a way that enables us to get this high conversion efficiency. And then the second pulse, of course, generates that very hot plasma that we need for generating 13.5 nanometers at high power. Once we crested that, it became, I wouldn't say easy, but at least we saw the path and we were able to make changes to the system and we could see the immediate benefit. We actually still do work looking at how do we continue to push the power and the features of the light source that will support future scanners.
Bunny suits are required around these precision tools because the tiniest particle could kill a wafer pattern.
The major source of particles in a clean room is actually the people. The equipment generally, unless something is actually scraping and something's misadjusted, they don't generate particles. The bunny suits are to protect the tools and the wafers from the contamination.
Here we have largely the manufacturing activities is associated with the droplet generator. We also have an area we call integration where we look at the entire source and how it performs. When you go into look at an EUV source, you see a large vessel with lots of interconnects in it. We have gas, power, water, etc. that needs to be delivered. We'll see a beam transport system, so where we actually bring the high power laser beam into the vessel.
ASML has been shipping this machine to chip manufacturers, and it takes 40 freight containers spread over 20 trucks and 3 cargo planes just to send one of them.
This is an army of people putting things together and pushing the edge of technology to make it work at all. And then, of course, having to make it work day in and day out.
The EUV scanner is the most technically advanced tool of any kind that's ever been made. It's so far from normal human experience. I can't think of anything that has pushed the envelope in so many areas. There were many knowledgeable people in the field who just said you can never make a practical tool this way.
We're just starting to enter into high volume manufacturing with EUV powered scanners. In fact, we're just starting to see some end products that are actually coming out that have been enabled by EUV technology.
There's an insatiable amount of data. So you can build chips to store data, process data, move data around the whole cloud. There's lots and lots of chips doing all 3 of those things. I was talking with some people that are building the next particle accelerators, and they're going to generate trillions of events every second. And there's no way to make sense of all of that, even with this generation of computers. So you've got to go build ever faster computers, larger data storage, just to make sense of the science that's going on. Part of predicting the future is around diagnosing trends in technology. If you don't know what the future holds, are you afraid of that or are you encouraged by it? And I'm in the category of being encouraged by it because there's things to do that you haven't done before, things to create that you haven't created before. And then you may not set out to change the world, but we change the world one step at a time.
Okay, hopefully you guys, what do you think of that? Yeah, I think it's pretty cool too. So something I actually forgot to mention before I started that, so apologies, is that the guy with the Australian accent, that guy's my boss. So he's a fun guy, very smart guy. He's been doing this for a long time. I actually was fortunate enough to come into the company after they discovered a lot of these big things. So I wasn't so much on the hot seat to make these things work, but he was. So yeah, that's kind of a insight into what our company looks like and what we do, why we do it. So this slide I don't want to spend too much time on, but a few of you mentioned you are in physics or you've taken physics. One equation, for example, you'd learn about in Physics 101 is Bernoulli's equation, and this tells you about how a fluid, an ideal fluid, flows through a system and how energy changes from the fluid moving very quickly with some velocity to going up or down a hill, so changes in gravitational potential, and then also changes in pressure in the system. And I think one of the things they highlighted in that video was that the source of our EUV light are these little droplets of molten tin that are flying, as Danny was saying, well in excess of the speed limit. So what he means there is like if you're driving down the highway, right? I mean, these droplets are traveling faster than your car. And then we're taking lasers and hitting them at 50,000 times a second. So how do we generate these droplets? And the way we do that is we have this thing called a droplet generator, and it has a big pressurized vat of molten tin, and there's some pressure in that system. And that pressure then pushes tin through an orifice and causes the droplets to form as they exit this orifice. And so this equation here tells you how much pressure do you need to produce a given velocity of these droplets. And the velocity and the spacing of these droplets is something that we worry about enormously in our systems. And this very simple equation drives a huge amount of work in our field. Another equation here is something called diffraction. So this is something that tells you a little bit about the behavior of light. Light can behave as a wave, and waves can diffract. That is when they encounter some sort of feature, usually something that's on the order of the wavelength of the light will actually bend, basically. And that's just due to the wave-like nature of the light. And this simple equation here tells you how that light bends. And we use that to study, to build things called spectrometers that allow us to actually study what kind of light are we generating. Something they didn't touch on too much is that this plasma that we're generating, it makes the light that we care about, this 13.5 nanometers, but it also generates a whole bunch of other light. And ideally, we'd like to minimize that extra light that we don't care about, just to maximize the amount of energy we're putting into the 13.5 nanometer light. And so we can use this equation to actually study quantitatively what kind of light are we generating when we make our plasma. And then finally, there's a simple imaging equation. So this tells you if you have a lens or a mirror with some curvature to it, that has a corresponding focal length. That's something here represented by F. And like an image of something, how do you actually bring that image into focus? So this equation tells you how to do that. And our EUV machines are essentially just very, very powerful imaging machines. That's how we actually get that blueprint from the mask down onto the wafer and print these tiny features. And it's also something that I use routinely to develop metrologies that allow us to look at this plasma and say, okay, what does the plasma actually look like? How can we make this thing burn more efficiently and make more light? So on and so forth. So these are just 3 simple equations that you're going to learn in Physics 101 that will get you quite far, actually, if you're working at a company like ASML. So I think this will be the last slide. This is just a quick glimpse at what a day in the life as a physicist at ASML looks like. So the environment, I think you saw a little bit of that in the video. You saw some look at the labs. In particular, we have clean rooms. That's where people have to dress up in these bunny suits to protect the equipment from contamination. We also have just a lot of little workbenches where people build one-off prototypes, so on and so forth. And then of course there's also a fair bit of office work, just like a lot of other jobs, and there you're sitting at a desk, you're writing computer code, you're reading documents, you're in meeting rooms talking to people. This stuff is very, very collaborative. It doesn't just happen by one person working. We have, it's a huge team effort to get this thing working. So the work, it looks like quite a few things. I think one of the things I like most about my job is that no one day is like the other. It keeps me on my toes, and I am one day doing calculus, the next day I'll be turning a wrench, the next day I'll be running an experiment. So it's a lot of fun. But it might look like designing, building, and fielding various types of instrumentation. You might be planning, executing, and analyzing results from experiments, and then generating and documenting these test results and transferring it to the rest of the company so that they can build a successful product. And the tools, well, this is where a lot of the fun stuff is. So we have, lasers. We have some very high power lasers that we work with, as well as associated optics and optical devices to manipulate that light and produce these laser beams that are precisely tuned to hit these droplets. All of this process happens inside of a vacuum, so that means we have these large chambers that we've pumped the air out of. That's required because this light that we generate is actually absorbed in air, so it can't actually propagate through the air we're breathing right now. So everything has to happen in vacuum. And that's a whole field of technology in and of itself, is the optics that are used to reflect the EUV itself that we generate. You can't use lenses. So like your glasses, for example, they also would just absorb the EUV. We can't have that. So all of the optics in our system have to be these highly specialized mirrors designed by some of our industrial partners. Some of the most precisely fabricated optics in existence. We also have tons of electronics. You saw all of the cables connected to these machines. There's tons of data coming off of these machines, and we're constantly trying to analyze that data and learn how to make this system work better, more efficiently. Of course, also, we rely very heavily on our fundamentals that we learn in math and physics, even things we learn here in high school. And then also programming. So I don't know if you guys, I hope there's a chance to do some programming here at the STEM school, but that's absolutely essential is being able to write some programs and analyze some data. And my personal favorite's Python, but you can kind of pick and choose there, so whatever you prefer. So that's all I have, and I'd like to open the floor for questions and answers. So the question is, do I follow physics outside of what I do? Yeah, that's a good question. I think so. Yeah, I mean, I kind of follow most developments in physics, at least at a very high level. I'm not reading journal publications from CERN, the particle collider in Switzerland, for example. But I follow it more or less as a layperson. But I did come out of the plasma physics and fusion community, so I still pretty closely follow that. Some of my previous coworkers still work they still work in fusion, and as I mentioned, there's a lot of exciting work going on right now. There's a ton of excitement and a lot of money flowing to various startup companies, so it's a pretty interesting time to watch what's happening there. The Nobel Prize in Physics was just announced this week, so that's always fun. So the people that won the prize won for attosecond physics. So basically they're taking, they actually are also using EUV wavelengths of light, but they're making these pulses super, super short. I forget what an attosecond is, but it's, I think, 10 to the negative 15 seconds. So I think I saw a sketch that said an attosecond is to a second as a second is to the age of the universe. So that's the span of scales that we're talking about. So yeah, so physics is always fun to keep up with, or to try to keep up with. There are many companies, but the big three are the TSMC, Samsung, and Intel. There's some other companies that are slipping my mind, but smaller volume companies. TSMC, for example, has many of our machines, dozens, whereas some other companies might only have a few. We also, something that maybe didn't come across in that video is this system, this whole ecosystem doesn't just rely around this EUV machine. The EUV machine is actually used to just print the most critical, smallest features in your computer chip. And then you can actually build on top of those small features less dense, larger features that bring in power and are just less sensitive components but are still needed. And those are actually made using older technologies because the dimensions aren't as critical. And so there's a whole zoo of machines in one of these fabs that are required to print a computer chip. And I honestly don't know how many there are, but there's still machines that were made, they said 385 nanometers, that were made in the 80s. And a lot of those machines are actually still in the fabs making computer chips. They're just working on these less critical dimensions. Does that answer your question? Yeah, stocks. I do have some stock in the company. I think a lot of these tech companies, they will actually provide you stocks as incentives. So it might be part of your annual compensation. You can also, they have employee purchase plans, so they allow you to purchase stocks at a semi-favorable price as long as you promise to hold on to them for a certain amount of time. There is somewhat of a fundamental physics limit for the resolution limit from these machines. I should have put that in the simple equation slide. But basically, it was discovered many years ago, over 100 years ago, by a guy named Abbe, A-B-B-E. I think he was a German physicist, and he basically said that the resolution you can print with is proportional to the wavelength. Wavelengths, you can print smaller features. And then the other thing that matters is something called the numerical aperture, which corresponds to the size of the optics that image the light down onto the wafer. So you make that bigger, you increase the collection efficiency of that optic. That's something we call the numerical aperture. If you make that larger, you can also print smaller features. So that's kind of what our next generation machine will do, is it will take this EUV light, but it will use even larger optics. We call it a high NA machine, and that will enable us to print, again, even smaller features. I think that machine is coming online in the next few years. But again, a whole level of effort to bring that technology to the forefront. As far as a fundamental limit, I mean, that tells you what you can do with one single pass. There's all sorts of other tricks you can play. So something, if you want to print these smallest features, for example, in the news, there was a lot of fanfare recently about Huawei producing a phone that people just didn't think they could do with the technology they had. They thought that they needed EUV technology, but they don't have access to that due to embargoes. Nevertheless, they did produce a chip that people just thought they couldn't do, and they were using one of these older technologies, the DUV. But what you can do is you can actually run the wafer through many, many times. It's called multi-patterning, and it allows you to somewhat defeat this resolution limit from optics. What it really relies on you being able to do, though, is very precisely position your wafer such that you can, basically rely on the repeatability of your machine to make these smaller features. But that also costs a lot more money. Now, to produce these smallest features with DUV, you have to run it through like 4 times. So 4 times as expensive. So the question was, have I been in the clean room, and what's the process to get inside? Yes, I go to the clean room multiple times a week. We have those machines on site. I work on those mostly every day. The machines they were showing in the video, some of those were actually the machines that I work on. There are various types of clean rooms. There are some where you have to wear the full bunny suit. There's others where you just need to wear a gown and some, a hair bouffant to keep your hair in, so on and so forth. But the full clean room is always a trip to enter. I've told my wife, she's in the back. I've told her this story many times. But yeah, you have to go through a full training on how to do this. And what you first do is you come in. Before you enter, you need to vacuum your shoes. So they have a machine with the brushes your shoes and vacuums all the dust off. Then you go into the gowning room. That's what we call it. Then you need to take your shoes off. Anything you want to bring into the clean room, like your phone or your laptop, you have to wipe down with alcohol wipes. You drop that off. Then you have to actually hop over. And they have that wall there so you don't just walk into the next area, which they call the gray area. So that's moderately dirty. So you hop over that wall, then you go to a bunch of cubbies and you pull out a bunch of drawers. And these drawers have a bunch of vacuum sealed bags that have all the clothing that you need to put on. So then you put on your gown. You have to be very careful as you step into this thing. They don't want the arms or the sleeves of your gown to touch the ground because the ground's the dirtiest place. So you have to be very careful about how you do that. And then you put on socks, you put on gloves, you put on a hair thing. It's a whole thing. Then, well, no, before you put on the socks, you have to hop over another wall. Finally, on this second wall, you put your socks on, and then you can step into the other area, which is almost clean. Then you put on safety shoes. Then you put on laser safety glasses, then you put on gloves, and then you can finally enter the clean room. So it's a big process to go in. Yeah, how long does it take? When you're new, it takes a long time. When you're used to it, like some people go in multiple times a day, every day, which I don't, fortunately. I think I could probably do that in like 10 minutes. Yeah. And then you have to do the whole thing in reverse when you want to leave, which includes when you want to go use the restroom. I think a lot of people at the company work relatively standard hours. In the research department, which is where I work, I think a lot of people are very highly driven, and we really want to get the work done. A lot of us have come out of PhD programs where we're used to putting in very long hours. So I definitely put in typically more than 40 hours a week. It's probably more like 50 or 60. It varies. It can, some weeks are less than 40. It just depends. And when I work the most is when I'm going to be running experiments. So typically, you will basically put in a proposal to run an experiment, and then a small committee will decide whether or not your experiment is worth running, because there's a lot of experiments people want to run. These machines are definitely overbooked, and they cost a lot of money to run. So whenever you do get experimental time, there's a big push to put in the time and get the results that you need. And often that requires that you work more than 8 hours in a day.